Hollywood loves to hand out trophies, but sometimes the real masterpieces are the ones they pretend not to see. And when Outlander's Tony Curran called out the Emmys for snubbing 1923, he wasn't just defending a show, he was exposing a system that doesn't know how to handle Sheridan's brand of raw, unapologetic storytelling. So buckle up, because we're about to break down why 1923 wasn't just overlooked, it was robbed, and why this snub might be the biggest mistake the Emmys have made in years. Tony Curran's bold statement. Tony Curran didn't just toss out a polite nod to 1923, he lit a fire under the Emmy conversation that had been quietly smoldering since the nominations dropped. In an industry where most actors tiptoe around award snubs, Curran went straight for the jugular, calling the show one of Sheridan's crowning achievements and questioning why it was largely ignored by Emmy voters. Coming from a veteran actor with his own impressive resume, the statement wasn't just supportive, it was a pointed reminder that artistry doesn't always align with accolades, and sometimes the best work gets buried under politics and hype. What makes Curran's words resonate is that he wasn't alone. He voiced what millions of fans had already been shouting across social media. 1923 wasn't just another Sheridan project. It was a sprawling, beautifully brutal saga with powerhouse performances from Harrison Ford and Helen Mirren, the kind of prestige casting that usually makes Emmy voters swoon. Yet somehow, the show slipped through the cracks, and Curran's blunt defense turned that silence into a rallying cry. His comments reframed the conversation. Was this an oversight or a deliberate snub of a series that pushed boundaries Emmy voters weren't ready to embrace? And here's where Curran's boldness really hits by naming the elephant in the room. He may have just elevated 1923's legacy more than a trophy ever could. Awards fade, but cultural memory sticks, and a respected actor like Curran publicly staking his reputation on the show gives it new weight. In many ways, his statement turned a snub into a badge of honor, painting 1923 not as a forgotten contender, but as the masterpiece the establishment was too cautious to reward. For Sheridan and his fans, that might just be the sweetest kind of victory. Why 1923 deserved more awards buzz. When you stack 1923 against the shows that dominated the Emmy stage, it's hard not to wonder if voters even watched the same series fans did. Taylor Sheridan didn't just deliver another Western, he gave us a sweeping cinematic epic that fused raw frontier grit with prestige-level storytelling. From the snow-capped battles in Africa to the brutal survival of ranch life in Montana, 1923 played like a feature film each week, anchored by A-list talent and a narrative scope that rivaled Hollywood blockbusters. If that's not awards-worthy, what is? The performances alone should have guaranteed 1923 a seat at the table. Harrison Ford and Helen Mirren didn't just lend star power, they brought decades of gravitas, inhabiting their roles with the kind of depth that makes you forget you're watching icons. Add in Brandon Sklener's tortured heroism, Julia Schlepfer's heartbreaking arc, and Amina Neve's gut-wrenching resilience, and you had a cast firing on all cylinders. It was the kind of ensemble that should have had Emmy voters circling their ballots in ink, not passing it over like a forgotten option. But maybe the real reason 1923 didn't get its due is that it dared to tell stories Emmy voters didn't expect from a so-called Western. It tackled colonialism, generational trauma, and the cost of survival in ways that were anything but romanticized. It wasn't a glossy nostalgia trip. It was a brutal, unflinching look at history. And sometimes, honesty makes voters uncomfortable. If anything, the lack of awards buzz says less about the quality of 1923 and more about the blind spots of the establishment. Was it too gritty for the Emmys? There's a real case to be made that 1923 wasn't overlooked because it lacked quality, but because it had too much of it in places Emmy voters weren't ready to confront. Sheridan didn't sugarcoat the brutal realities of the early 20th century. He forced viewers to watch them unfold in all their rawness. From the haunting portrayal of indigenous boarding schools to the violent sacrifices made on the Montana frontier, 1923 didn't aim for comfort, it aimed for truth. And sometimes the truth doesn't play well on a red carpet built on polished performances and glossy narratives, while other so-called prestige dramas leaned into sleek dialogue and safe political metaphors. 1923 went for the jugular. It didn't just show the cost of survival, it demanded you feel it. For Emmy, voters accustomed to the kind of shows that dazzle without disturbing, Sheridan's work may have been too heavy, too dark, and too unwilling to flinch. It was the kind of television that lingers with you long after the credits roll, not because it entertained, but because it unsettled, and unsettling rarely equals awards. But here's the irony, that very grit is what made 1923 unforgettable for fans. Sheridan refused to sand down the edges of history, and in doing so, created a series that might have been too raw for the Emmys, but perfect for viewers who crave authenticity over polish. If the Emmys couldn't handle that, maybe it says more about the awards than the art. In fact, 1923's refusal to play nice might be exactly why it deserves to be remembered as a masterpiece. The impact of Helen Mirren and Harrison Ford. When Helen Mirren and Harrison Ford signed on for 1923, it wasn't just casting, it was a seismic event. Sheridan didn't simply land two Hollywood legends, he handed them roles that demanded grit, vulnerability, and the kind of gravitas only decades of experience can deliver. Their presence instantly elevated the show beyond Western drama and into prestige television territory, signaling to audiences and critics alike that this wasn't just another spin-off, it was a serious contender in the golden age of TV. Mirren, with her razor-sharp poise and quiet ferocity, turned Cara Dutton into the heartbeat of the series, a matriarch as compassionate as she was ruthless. Ford, meanwhile, shed the heroic swagger audiences knew him for, transforming Jacob Dutton into a weary but unbreakable patriarch haunted by both time and duty. Together, they created a duo that didn't just anchor the story, they redefined what late-career performances could look like in television, making every scene between them feel like an acting masterclass. And yet, here's the shocker. Even with that powerhouse pairing, the Emmys turned a blind eye. If two of the most celebrated actors of our time couldn't drag the Academy's gaze toward 1923, it raises the question, was the snub less about performance and more about Sheridan's refusal to play the award season game? Either way, Mirren and Ford's impact can't be measured by a trophy. Their work in 1923 ensured the show will be remembered as much for its artistry as for its storytelling. What this means for future Sheridan shows. If 1923 can deliver powerhouse performances, massive viewership, and critical praise, only to be largely ignored by the Emmys, what does that mean for the future of Taylor Sheridan's sprawling TV empire? For one, it proves that Sheridan can't rely on industry accolades to validate his work. Instead, he's leaning into something far more valuable, an ironclad bond with his audience. The Emmys may have shrugged, but viewers showed up in droves, and that loyalty is the real fuel behind Sheridan's growing dominance. This also signals a shift in how Sheridan might shape his upcoming projects, like 1944 and Landman. If awards aren't in the cards, he has even more freedom to double down on the gritty, unflinching storytelling that hooked his fans in the first place. Sheridan has never been one to chase approval from Hollywood's establishment, and the 1923 snub may push him further into crafting stories that speak directly to his audience instead of the voting committees. In the long game, this could actually give Sheridan an edge. With each snub, his shows feel less like polished studio bids for prestige and more like raw, uncompromising visions that dare to go where others won't. If 1923 taught us anything, it's that Sheridan doesn't need a golden statue to prove his impact. The real prize is the empire he's building and the millions of viewers who keep coming back for more. At the end of the day, a golden statue gathers dust, but a story that sears itself into your memory lasts forever. Tony Curran may have said it best, but fans already knew 1923 wasn't just another Sheridan spinoff, it was a towering work of art that deserved the spotlight. So tell me, do you think the Emmys dropped the ball, or are they simply out of touch with what audiences actually crave? Drop your thoughts below, hit that subscribe button, and let's make sure this masterpiece never gets forgotten.